When the Karen sisters moved into the neighborhood, everyone knew trouble had arrived. They were the self-proclaimed HOA queens, always waving their clipboards, judging lawns, and handing out warnings for the tiniest things like leaving a garden hose out or not trimming the hedges just right. I tried to stay polite, keeping my distance. But one morning I woke up to something that made my blood boil. Piles of soggy brown leaves dumped all over my front yard. And not just a few. It looked like the entire forest had collapsed onto my grass. At first I thought it was a mistake until I spotted their security camera pointed right at my house, and the smug laughter echoing from their porch. They'd done it on purpose. The HOA Karen sisters claimed my tree's leaves were ruining their lawn, so they returned them. Oh, they wanted war. They got one. I decided to give them a taste of their own medicine, but with style. No shouting, no complaints. Just sweet, silent revenge. I ordered 5 truckloads of mulch, thick, dark, and fragrant, and had it all delivered bright and early one sunny Saturday morning. By noon, their pristine white porch had disappeared under a mountain of mulch so high it reached their windows. As I leaned on my rake, sipping lemonade, I smiled when they came out screaming. For once the HOA couldn't help them. They started it. I just finished it with a shovel and a sense of justice. The sun was bright that late Saturday morning, spilling across the quiet suburban street like a golden flood. Birds chirped lazily from the oak trees, and the smell of freshly cut grass floated through the air. It was the kind of calm, picture-perfect morning that made you want to grab a cup of coffee, sit on the porch, and forget about the world. But for me, that calm wouldn't last, not with the Karen sisters living next door. Their names were Becky and Brenda. Though everyone on the block called them the HOA sisters, they weren't officially part of the Homeowners Association board, but you'd never know it from the way they strutted around, clutching clipboards and bossing people about. They took it upon themselves to be the guardians of neighborhood standards. Every blade of grass, every trash can, every parked car, they watched everything. Like two hawks wearing pearls and sunglasses when I first moved in, I tried to be friendly. I waved, I smiled. I even baked them cookies during my first week, hoping to start off on the right foot. Becky accepted the cookies but gave me a look like she was inspecting for poison. Brenda, meanwhile, pointed out that my mailbox wasn't in line with community style and suggested I replace it with an approved model. That should have been my first warning. Over the next few weeks, the Karen sisters seemed to appear everywhere. When I was trimming my hedge, they stood at their driveway whispering. When I washed my car, they walked past slowly, pretending to check their mail. I once caught Becky snapping a photo of my recycling bin because, apparently, I put it out too early in the morning. Their favorite phrase was, "We'll be reporting that." Still, I kept my cool. I figured if I ignored them, they'd get bored. But Karen sisters don't get bored, they get creative. It all started when autumn came. My giant maple tree began to shed its leaves. They drifted down like golden snow, covering my lawn and, occasionally, a small part of the sisters' pristine yard. I made sure to rake every few days, keeping things tidy. But one afternoon I came home from work to find a bright yellow note taped to my door. It read, in bold handwriting, "Please ensure your tree's debris stays within your property. This is a community, not a compost pile." HOA, except the HOA didn't send that. I knew exactly who did. The ink still smelled fresh. I laughed it off at first. Leaves blow. That's nature. No one else on the street cared. In fact, my other neighbors often joked about how obsessive the sisters were. They'd measure the air if they could, old Mr. Johnson once said, shaking his head. But the next morning, things escalated. I woke up to the faint sound of rustling outside my window. At first I thought it was the wind. Then I heard laughter, sharp, smug laughter. I peeked through the blinds and froze. There they were, the Karen sisters, in matching tracksuits and gloves, scooping piles of leaves from their yard into big black trash bags. I watched as they walked right over to my front lawn and dumped them out, not just a handful, bag after bag, until my yard looked like a forest floor. Becky brushed her hands together and said loudly, "There are, now maybe he'll learn to keep his mess on his side." Brenda smirked. Some people just don't respect the rules. I felt my blood boil, my jaw tightened, and for a split second I almost stormed out. But then I noticed something. Brenda's phone was out, recording. They wanted me to react. They wanted a show. If I yelled, if I even raised my voice, I'd become the villain of their story. So I didn't give them that satisfaction. Instead, I opened my front door, walked down my porch steps slowly, and stood on the sidewalk. "Morning, ladies," I said, keeping my tone calm. "Something I can help you with?" Becky didn't even look ashamed. "Just cleaning up your mess," she said. "Your tree keeps dumping on our lawn. We're returning your property." "Returning my property," I repeated with a smile. "That's an interesting way to put it." They both crossed their arms, waiting for me to argue. But I didn't. I simply nodded, gave them a polite wave, and went back inside. Through the window I could see their confused faces. They were expecting a fight. Instead, they got silence. Once they left, I stepped outside again and surveyed the damage. My once neat yard was buried under soggy brown leaves. The pile was nearly a foot deep in places. I spent the next 2 hours cleaning it up, my rake scraping the ground while the sisters peeked from their window. Each scrape of the rake gave me time to think not about getting even with anger but about something better, something poetic. By the time the yard was spotless again, I had a plan forming. A slow smile crept across my face as I leaned on my rake, looking at their immaculate porch white wood, spotless steps, potted flowers perfectly aligned. It looked like something straight out of a magazine. That's when it hit me. If they loved their porch that much, maybe it was time they experienced what it felt like to have their perfect space buried in something they didn't want. But I didn't rush it. Patience, I told myself. Let them think they'd won. Over the next few days, I acted perfectly normal. I waved, watered my plants, and made small talk with the mailman as usual. The Karen sisters strutted past me several times, heads high, clearly proud of what they'd done. They even started bragging to other neighbors about how they'd taught me a lesson. I could see the disapproval in the neighbors' eyes, but no one dared challenge them. Everyone had been burned by their gossip before. Meanwhile, I made a phone call to a local landscaping company. I told them I needed a lot of mulch delivered, 5 full truckloads. When the man on the phone asked where to drop it, I paused and smiled. "Oh, I'll tell you exactly when you get here," I said. The day before the delivery, I stood in my front yard trimming the hedges when Becky walked over, her lips pursed. "Just a reminder," she said, "the HOA will be inspecting yards next week. You might want to tidy up." "Oh, don't worry," I replied with a grin. "I've got something planned that'll make the whole neighborhood look better." She raised an eyebrow but didn't respond. She turned sharply and strutted back to her porch, her clipboard tucked under her arm. That evening, as the sun dipped low but still bathed the street in warm light, I stood at my window, staring at their porch. It gleamed like a shrine to control every pot in place, every tile spotless. I pictured it covered in something earthy, messy, and unmissable, a symbol of balance restored. Tomorrow the trucks would come. Tomorrow, the Karen sisters would learn what it truly meant to return property. As I closed the blinds and went to bed, a single thought made me chuckle quietly to myself. Sometimes, peace doesn't come from silence, it comes from a well-timed truckload of mulch. The morning arrived, bright, clear, and full of promise. A light breeze carried the smell of cut grass through the neighborhood, and sunlight danced off the windshields of neatly parked cars. It was one of those calm suburban mornings where time seemed to move slower, but beneath that calm, I was buzzing with anticipation. Today was the day. I woke up earlier than usual, pulled on a pair of work jeans, a plain t-shirt, and an old baseball cap. Before stepping outside, I brewed myself a mug of coffee and stood at the kitchen window, staring across the street. There it was, the Karen sisters' perfect white porch. The flower pots glowed in the morning light, every petal angled just so. A pair of wicker chairs sat symmetrically beside a little table that held a vase of lilies. Everything screamed perfection. It almost felt wrong to disturb it. Almost at exactly 9 o'clock, I heard the deep rumble of diesel engines approaching from down the street. I stepped onto my front lawn just in time to see the first truck, a massive, dirt-streaked dump truck loaded high with dark brown mulch in the corner. The sunlight gleamed off its metal bed, and the smell of fresh wood and earth hit me before it even stopped. 2 more trucks followed behind, then 2 more, 5 in total, just as I'd ordered. The drivers climbed out, their boots crunching against the pavement. The lead driver, a big guy with a beard and a baseball cap that read Green Earth Landscaping, walked up to me with a grin. "Morning," he said. "You the one who ordered the mountain?" "That's me," I said, shaking his hand. "Thanks for being on time." He glanced around the quiet neighborhood, clearly amused. "Where do you want it all dumped?" I pointed across the street at the Karen sisters' house. "Right there," I said, "on that front porch. Pile it high." He blinked. "The porch?" "Yep. Don't worry, it's all on me. Just ... consider it a special delivery." For a moment, he looked like he might question it, but then he broke into a grin. "Hey, if you're paying, we're dumping. Let's make it a good one." As the first truck backed into position, the familiar screech of its reverse alarm echoed down the street. That sound alone brought life to the block. Curtains shifted. Doors opened. Curious neighbors peeked out, whispering to one another. Mrs. Johnson from next door leaned over her fence. "Morning, dear," she said. "What's all this?" "Oh, just a little home improvement project," I said with a wink. Her eyes widened when she saw where the trucks were lining up. "Oh my, that's their house." I nodded, trying to suppress my smile. Exactly. By now, the Karen sisters' front door had swung open. Becky stepped out first, wearing her usual morning robe and slippers, her hair tied up in a messy bun. Brenda followed, clutching a mug of tea. They both froze when they saw the trucks. "Excuse me," Becky shouted, marching forward, her slippers slapping the pavement. "What is this?" The driver, already in the cab, shouted over the engine. "Mulch delivery. Mulch delivery," Brenda echoed, her voice sharp. "We didn't order any mulch." The driver shrugged. "Not my problem, ma'am. The order says this address. 5 loads. I stepped forward, coffee mug in hand, and called out cheerfully, "Good morning, ladies. Surprise. Thought your porch could use some natural decoration." Their mouths dropped open in perfect unison. "You..." Becky started, but the truck's hydraulics drowned out her words as the bed lifted and a torrent of dark, Rich mulch cascaded down in a thunderous wave. The sound was glorious, like thunder rolling across dry earth. The mulch poured down the steps, spilling across the walkway, swallowing the white wood beneath it. The sisters screamed, waving their arms, but there was nothing they could do. Within minutes, their perfect porch had vanished under a thick, waist-high blanket of mulch. The smell of pine and earth filled the air. The second truck pulled up before the first one had even finished. The drivers were working fast, efficient, and slightly amused. Each load made the pile higher, until it reached nearly halfway up the front door. Neighbors gathered in small groups along the sidewalks, whispering, laughing quietly, pretending not to watch but failing miserably. Even kids riding bikes slowed down to stare. One little boy yelled, "Whoa, that's awesome," before his mother hurried him away. Meanwhile, the Karen sisters were losing it. Brenda ran to the edge of the pile, waving her arms at the driver. "Stop, you can't do this. We'll call the H. Already did," I said casually, sipping my coffee. "They said as long as it's organic yard material, it's technically landscaping. I'm just returning property." Becky's face turned red. "This is harassment." "Oh, no," I replied smoothly. "This is balance." The third truck dumped its load, and the sound of sliding mulch filled the air once again. The mountain now reached the height of the porch railing. Becky's slippers disappeared as she tried to climb over it, shouting something about property damage. I almost felt bad. Almost when the final truck left, a silence settled over the street. The only sound was the occasional thud of mulch sliding down the pile. The sisters stood frozen on the sidewalk, their porch completely buried. Their perfect white chairs, flowers, and decorations were gone, consumed by a sea of brown. The lead driver approached me, wiping his hands on his jeans. "Old and that was one heck of a job. You sure you don't want to add a little more?" I grinned. "Tempting, but I think this'll do the trick." He laughed and climbed back into his truck. One by one, the engines started, and the convoy rolled away, leaving behind the mountain of mulch and two furious women. Becky turned toward me, trembling with rage. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "We're filing a complaint." "Go ahead," I said. "I'll just tell them you dumped debris on my property first. I've got footage from your little leaf operation." Her face went pale. You recorded us?" "No," I said with a smirk. "Your own camera did." Funny thing about security systems, they work both ways. For once, both sisters were speechless. They just stood there, glaring at the pile of mulch like it had personally betrayed them. I turned back toward my house, feeling a strange, peaceful satisfaction. The sun was warm on my back, and the air smelled earthy and clean. I sat on my porch, took another sip of coffee, and watched as they began the slow, miserable work of shoveling mulch off their porch. By noon, their pristine clothes were stained brown, their hair frizzed from sweat, and their hands blistered from shoveling. They didn't even look my way again. Every so often a neighbor would stroll past, pretending to be surprised. "Oh dear, what happened?" they'd ask, and the sisters would mutter something about a delivery mistake. But everyone knew the truth. That afternoon, the neighborhood felt lighter, happier even. People waved more, chatted longer. The air seemed to hum with shared amusement. The Karen sisters had finally been silenced, at least for now. And as I sat back, legs crossed, watching them shovel in the bright daylight, I couldn't help but smile. Revenge didn't always have to be loud or cruel. Sometimes, it could be natural, earthy, and delivered by the truckload. The next morning, the street was buzzing with quiet whispers. Everyone had seen the mountain of mulch, and though most pretended to be shocked, I caught more than a few smiles and suppressed laughs from my neighbors. It was the talk of the entire neighborhood, how the mighty Karen sisters had been buried, quite literally, under their own nonsense. By mid, the sisters' once perfect porch still looked like a construction site. They had managed to clear a narrow path to their front door, but the rest remained an enormous mound of brown earth. Becky's flower pots were broken. Brenda's decorative welcome mat was nowhere to be seen, and the once white porch railing was stained with dark mulch streaks. I was sipping coffee on my own porch when I saw the silver SUV roll slowly down the street. My grin faded a little as I recognized the HOA logo on the side. Great, the cavalry had arrived. Out stepped Mr. Dawson, the HOA president, a tall, soft-spoken man in his 50s who always wore neatly pressed shirts and carried a leather binder like it was part of his body. He was calm, fair, and generally well-liked. But I knew this visit wasn't going to be a casual chat. He parked in front of the sisters' house, and within seconds, Brenda came rushing out, waving her arms. "Mr. Dawson, finally. You have to do something about this man," she cried, pointing across the street at me. Becky followed behind her, holding up her phone like evidence. "He's destroyed our property. Look at this mess. It's a hate crime against landscaping." I nearly choked on my coffee. Mr. Dawson raised his hands for peace. "Ladies, one at a time," he said calmly. "Let's just get the full story before we jump to conclusions." "Oh, we'll give you the story," Becky said, her voice shrill. "He dumped all this mulch on our porch. 5 truckloads, on purpose." Mr. Dawson's eyes widened slightly. 5 truckloads. "Yes," Brenda snapped. "He's a menace to the neighborhood. This is vandalism." Mr. Dawson turned to me. "Is this true, sir?" I smiled politely, setting my coffee down. "Well, not quite the way they're telling it. You see, these lovely ladies here decided to dump several bags of leaves from my tree onto my property last week. I thought I'd return the favor politely, of course, with some natural yard material. Community recycling. A few neighbors chuckled quietly from their driveways. The sisters glared at them like laser beams. Mr. Dawson sighed, clearly trying not to laugh. All right, let's keep this civil. Do you have any proof of the initial leaf incident? I do, I said, pulling out my phone. I had already saved a clip from their own security camera, which captured them dumping the leaves early that morning. I played the video. The sound of their giggles filled the air. Becky's face drained of color. Brenda muttered something about being taken out of context. Mr. Dawson raised an eyebrow. Ladies, I think that explains quite a bit. But he went too far, Becky insisted. This is harassment. We were just cleaning up our property by dumping it onto his. Mr. Dawson said evenly. I'd call that escalation. And from what I can see, he simply returned the gesture in a larger quantity. Brenda stomped her foot. You can't be serious. You're supposed to enforce HOA rules, not excuse this insanity. I am enforcing them, Mr. Dawson replied, flipping through his binder. And I don't see any specific rule about the maximum quantity of mulch allowed on a property. It's biodegradable and technically landscaping material. That nearly made me laugh out loud. The sisters' mouths opened and closed like fish out of water. They were speechless for the first time since I'd moved in. Mr. Dawson turned to me again. Still, sir, I would advise you to consider future harmony, perhaps a little less dramatic form of communication next time. Of course, I said with a grin. I'll stick to leaflets instead of leaves. Even Mr. Dawson cracked a smile at that as he wrapped up his inspection. A few neighbors wandered over, pretending to make small talk but clearly soaking in every word. Mrs. Johnson leaned toward me and whispered, You might have just done what we've all dreamed of doing for years. I'm just a man who loves yard work, I replied. Once Mr. Dawson left, the Karen sisters were fuming. Becky turned on me, her face red with frustration. This isn't over, she hissed. You think you're clever, but we'll find another way. I'm sure you will, I said calmly. But maybe next time, start with a conversation instead of a dump truck. She scoffed and stormed back inside, slamming the door hard enough to shake her flower boxes, what was left of them. For the rest of the day, the neighborhood buzzed with quiet laughter and gossip. People stopped by to check on the mulch situation. Some even offered to help the sisters clean it up, though mostly for the entertainment of watching them refuse the help out of pride. By late afternoon, the sun was high and hot. The sisters were still out there, shoveling and sweating, their manicured nails caked in dirt. I decided to mow my lawn, purely coincidentally, at the same time. The sound of the mower roared pleasantly in my ears as they glared holes into my back. After finishing, I leaned on the fence separating our properties. Need a hand? I called out cheerfully. Brenda straightened up, wiping sweat from her forehead. We don't need your help, she barked. Suit yourself, I said. Just thought I'd be neighborly. That earned me another death stare. By evening, the mulch pile had barely shrunk. The sisters gave up, retreating inside with loud, angry voices echoing through their open windows. The rest of the street returned to peace. Kids played catch, sprinklers hissed across green lawns, and for the first time since I'd moved there, the air felt light-free. Around sunset, as golden light bathed the houses, Mr. Dawson stopped by one last time. He stood beside me, hands in pockets, looking at the sisters' house. You know, he said quietly, I've been dealing with their complaints for years. Trash cans, mailbox heights, fence colors, you name it. I think you may have done this community a favor. I chuckled, just trying to keep things balanced. Well, he said with a faint smile, let's hope they learned something about neighborly respect. I doubt it, I said, but a man can dream. That night, I sat on my porch again, a cool breeze brushing through the trees. The smell of mulch still lingered faintly in the air, earthy and oddly satisfying. I sipped a beer and listened to the peaceful hum of crickets. For once, there were no angry glares, no clipboards, no rule reminders slipped under my door. The Karen sisters' porch lights were off, their curtains drawn. The neighborhood had gone quiet and I couldn't help but feel a small sense of victory. Little did I know, however, that their silence wasn't surrender. It was plotting. Because Karen sisters never stay down for long. The next few days were oddly peaceful, too peaceful. The Karen sisters had gone quiet. Their curtains stayed drawn, their porch empty, and for the first time since I'd moved in, there wasn't a single complaint note or glare from across the hedge. It felt almost unnatural, like the calm before a storm. By midweek, I started noticing small things. The first was a faint sour smell near my mailbox. When I opened it, I found a soggy envelope stuffed with rotting leaves and mud. There was no note, no handwriting, just nature's revenge. I chuckled under my breath. Subtle, but obvious. The Karen sisters were back in business. The next day, I woke up to the sound of barking. Not from a dog, there were no dogs on our street, but from a speaker. When I stepped outside, I saw a small Bluetooth speaker hidden behind my fence, blasting a recording of dogs barking non-stop. Across the street, I caught a glimpse of Brenda's curtain twitching. She was watching. I unplugged the speaker, tossed it into a trash bag, and gave her a cheerful wave. Her curtain dropped instantly. By Friday morning, the petty attacks had escalated. Someone had stuck fake HOA violation notices on my front door, 4 of them, printed on cheap paper, accusing me of things like unapproved shrub height and unsightly garden hose. Each one was signed simply, "Concerned Neighbors." I knew exactly who those concerned neighbors were. That evening, I decided to pay a friendly visit. I crossed the street just as the sunset turned the houses gold and knocked on their door. It took a full minute before Becky opened it a crack, her lips pressed tight. "Yes," she said, her tone dripping with false politeness. "Hey there," I said with a friendly smile. "Just wanted to return some of your mail." I held up the fake HOA notices. "Teams, these accidentally ended up on my door." Becky's eyes flicked to the papers and back to me. "I have no idea what you're talking about." "Sure," I said, still smiling. "Anyway, figured you'd want them back before I show them to Mr. Dawson." Her eyes widened slightly. "You wouldn't?" "Oh, I definitely would. He loves paperwork." From inside, Brenda's voice shouted, "Becky, don't talk to him." I gave a little wave. "Have a lovely evening, ladies." Then I turned and walked back across the street, leaving them fuming behind their door. But the sisters weren't the type to give up easily. The next morning, I woke to a loud thud against my garage door. I stepped outside to find a wheelbarrow full of dirt dumped at the base of my driveway. A handwritten sign stuck in the pile read, "Compliments of the HOA." It was almost comical. They were trying to get under my skin, but all they were really doing was confirming just how desperate they'd become. So, I decided to respond in kind but smarter. I called my friend Dan, who worked as a pest control specialist. "Hey," I said, trying not to laugh, "how much would it cost to do a yard spray right next door?" He chuckled. "What kind of spray are we talking about?" "Nothing harmful," I said quickly. "Just organic pest repellent. Safe for plants but smells like vinegar and garlic for a few days." Dan laughed harder. "Say no more. I'll make it extra strong." 2 days later, under a bright sunny sky, Dan's truck pulled up. He wore a neon vest and carried a large sprayer on his back. He walked straight to the property line and began spraying a fine mist that drifted across the sisters' manicured front lawn. The smell hit almost immediately, a pungent mix of vinegar, garlic, and citrus oil. Within minutes, their front door flew open. "What on earth are you doing?" Brenda shouted, waving a hand in front of her face. "Organic pest control," Dan said cheerfully. "Keeps away ants, beetles, and nosy neighbors." I nearly lost it right there. "Who authorized this?" Becky yelled, coughing as the breeze carried the smell closer. "I did," I said, walking over with my hands in my pockets. "Just protecting my property line. Wouldn't want pests crossing over." They both glared at me like they could set me on fire with their eyes. By evening, the entire street smelled faintly like an Italian salad, but the laughter from the neighbors made up for it. Mrs. Johnson said she hadn't laughed so hard in years. Even Mr. Dawson, when he drove by, gave me a knowing nod but said nothing. That night, I thought maybe the war was finally over. The sisters couldn't top that, right? I was wrong. The next morning, as I walked out to grab the newspaper, I noticed something strange on my lawn. Teeny flags, dozens of them, stuck neatly in the grass. Each flag had a handwritten note attached, with insults like lazy landscaper, leaf criminal, and neighborhood nuisance. They'd spent all night doing it. I couldn't even be mad. I burst out laughing. The effort alone deserved some respect. Instead of taking them down right away, I added my own sign in the center of the yard that said, "Public art installation sponsored by Karen and Karen." By noon, half the neighborhood had come by to take pictures. Someone even posted it on the local Facebook group, and it went mildly viral. The caption read, "The Great Suburban Leaf War Continues." When the sisters saw the attention, they were livid. I watched from my porch as Becky stormed outside, tearing the flags out one by one while Brenda yelled, "Stop filming. This isn't funny." But the more they yelled, the more people laughed. It was like watching the end of a long, ridiculous sitcom. By the end of that week, the sisters finally cracked. They held a neighborhood meeting, claiming it was about community order. But everyone knew it was their attempt to regain control. They handed out printed code reminders and tried to talk about lawn maintenance, but no one took them seriously anymore. Every time they mentioned proper yard decorum, someone coughed the word mulch. They ended the meeting early. After that, the sisters started keeping to themselves. Their porch stayed plain, their clipboards disappeared, and their voices no longer echoed down the street. The balance had shifted. The once feared HOA enforcers were now the neighborhood joke. One afternoon, as I watered my plants, Brenda walked by quietly on her way to the mailbox. She didn't look at me, didn't glare, just gave a small, tired nod. For the first time, I saw something human in her expression. Embarrassment, maybe, defeat. I nodded back. "Morning, morning," she muttered softly before heading inside. The war, it seemed, was finally cooling off. Still, as I leaned on my hose, watching the sunlight glint off the now peaceful street, I couldn't help but smile. I hadn't meant for it to go this far. But maybe, just maybe, it had taught them something about humility. Or so I thought, because even when a Karen is quiet, she's never truly done. Somewhere behind those closed curtains, The sisters were already planning their next move, and I had a feeling the final round of this suburban battle was yet to come. A week passed, and for the first time in months, peace had returned to our sunny little street. The sound of lawnmowers replaced shouting, laughter replaced complaints, and the air felt lighter, free from the constant tension the Karen sisters used to bring. I'd begun to think the storm had truly passed. Their porch, once buried under mulch, had been cleaned up, but something was different now. The flowers hadn't been replaced, the white railings were dull, and their perfect symmetry had vanished. It was as if they'd lost the will to keep pretending everything in their world was flawless. Every morning, I'd catch a glimpse of Becky or Brenda stepping out quietly to collect mail, heads low, clipboards nowhere in sight. They didn't glare, didn't whisper, just went about their business silently. For once, they were simply neighbors, not self-appointed rulers. I thought maybe, just maybe, they'd finally learned their lesson. But fate, it seemed, had one final twist left for all of us. One Thursday morning, Mr. Dawson, the HOA president, called for a neighborhood meeting. Nothing serious, he'd said over email, just a review of community harmony and landscaping updates. That phrase alone made me chuckle. When the day came, we all gathered in the park under the bright midday sun, rows of lawn chairs, lemonade stands, and families chatting freely. It was the biggest turnout we'd ever had. Even the Karen sisters showed up, sitting stiffly in the back with forced smiles plastered on their faces. Mr. Dawson cleared his throat and began. "I'd like to start by saying how proud I am of this community," he said. "We've come a long way these past few weeks. There's been, well, a lot of mulch, but also a lot of growth." The crowd chuckled softly. Then, to my surprise, Becky stood up. Her voice trembled slightly as she spoke. "I'd like to say something." Everyone went silent. Brenda gave her a wary look, but Becky pressed on. "We may have overstepped in the past," she began, glancing my way. "We just wanted to keep the neighborhood beautiful, but I realize now we went about it the wrong way. You could have heard a leaf fall. Even the birds stopped singing," Becky continued, her tone softer now. "It wasn't about rules. It was about control. We made people uncomfortable, and that's not what being neighbors means. So, for what it's worth, we're sorry." For a second, I wasn't sure if I'd heard her right. Becky, the same woman who once measured my fence height with a ruler, was apologizing. Brenda sat frozen beside her, looking like she'd just swallowed a lemon, but eventually gave a stiff nod in agreement. Mr. Dawson smiled warmly. "That's good to hear. I think we can all agree that forgiveness and moving forward are the best kind of landscaping we can do on our lawns and in our hearts." That earned a round of gentle laughter and applause. When the meeting ended, the sisters approached me. Becky extended a hand. "No hard feelings," she said, her eyes uncertain. I looked at her hand for a moment, then took it. "No hard feelings," I said. "But maybe next time, just knock on the door before starting a yard war." She actually laughed, a genuine, light laugh I'd never heard from her before. Brenda gave a half smile. "We're replanting the porch garden," she said quietly. "You can stop by for lemonade sometime. Only if it's not mulched flavor," I teased. Even she cracked a small grin. The following days felt refreshingly normal. Neighbors waved as they passed, kids played soccer on the sidewalks, and the sisters, true to their word, started replanting flowers. They even helped Mrs. Johnson with her fence and returned one of Dan's garden tools they'd borrowed months ago. It was strange, but in a good way. For once, everyone was on the same page. One bright Saturday morning, the community came together for a cleanup event organized by the HOA. We raked leaves, trimmed hedges, and spread mulch around the park garden beds. Every shovel of mulch made people laugh now. A running inside joked out at one point. Brenda turned to me with a smirk. "You realize you've started a trend, right? Everyone's using mulch now." I shrugged. "Guess I'm just ahead of my time," Becky added. "You might as well join the HOA. You've got leadership potential." "Let's not push it," I said quickly, and everyone burst out laughing. By afternoon, the park looked beautiful, freshly landscaped, bright, and alive. Mr. Dawson took a group photo, the whole neighborhood smiling together under the sunny sky. In that picture, the Karen sisters stood right beside me. No longer enemies, just neighbors who'd finally understood the meaning of community. That as the sun began to set, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gold, I sat on my porch, watching the street glow softly. Kids chased each other across lawns, sprinklers spun in lazy arcs, and the sisters' porch lights flickered on. Their new garden full of sunflowers and daisies looked radiant, and the faint scent of fresh mulch drifted on the warm breeze. It hit me then how funny life can be. What started as a petty feud over leaves had turned into something bigger, a lesson about patience, pride, and the power of humor. Revenge had turned into reconciliation, and somehow we'd all come out better for it. I leaned back in my chair, took a long sip of lemonade, and smiled. Sometimes, justice doesn't come in a courtroom or from authority. It comes from a wheelbarrow full of mulch, a few laughs, and a little humility. As dusk settled, I caught sight of the sisters stepping onto their porch, waving. I raised my glass in return. For the first time, It didn't feel like a battle, it felt like peace. The leaf war was over, and for once, everyone had one.